We're here because free speech is under attack. We're here because people are being convinced that socialism works. We're here because people are being judged guilty until proven innocent. We are fighting back with facts. This is not a safe zone, so buckle up, Buttercup. This is the raw, naked truth.
Welcome to the Raw Naked Truth. I'm your host, Eric Lupkin. Well, thanks to the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, climate change has been all over the media. The truth has little to do with this conference, but probably not in the way you think. Yes, climate change is real. This conference has actually exacerbated the problem as hundreds of private jets, limousines, and SUVs descend on Glasgow. The carbon footprint of this conference is more than most cities and some countries. The raw naked truth is no one knows how real climate change is. Why? Because the data behind climate change is chock full of lies. And again, they're not lying that it exists. They're lying about how bad the problem is. The Washington Post conducted an investigation that found that across the world, many countries underreport their greenhouse gas emissions. When they report it to the UN, they are responsible for those numbers, and they downplay it to make themselves look better. An examination of 196 country reports reveals a giant gap between what nations declare their emissions to be versus the greenhouse gases they are sending into the atmosphere. That gap ranges from at least 8.5 billion to as high as 13.3 billion tons every year of unreported emissions. So, should we listen to the environmentalists and treat this as a devastating crisis that they're making it out to be? Actually, no. The fact is, we are in this predicament because of environmentalists. Their efforts have made the problem worse, and their solutions will too. Let's step back in time to the 1970s. We used paper bags. Many children's toys were made of wood, and the environmental movement, then in its infancy, convinced politicians that that was going to deplete forests. We couldn't do that. So it all had to be replaced by plastic. Plastic bags, plastic toys, plastic packaging. And all that plastic is made of oil. So the environmentalists pushed entire industries into a dependence on oil. The environmental movement further pushed us into oil dependency by their opposition to nuclear power. Nuclear power produces no carbon emissions. Nuclear waste has been recycled and reused for over 3 decades. So the storage problems that they made a big deal about in the 1980s that were presented by nuclear waste have long been solved. The nuclear boogeyman has been blown out of proportion. There have been a grand total of 3 nuclear plants that had accidents. Chernobyl, which was the worst case scenario, and it was primarily because Russia ignored safety standards and cut corners. Then we have the accident in Japan, which was caused by being hit by an earthquake and tsunami. The plant that was hit was over 30 years old, and modern plants and better locations would have mitigated that disaster. Finally, 3 Mile Island, which had no fatalities, no environmental damage, and in fact, most nuclear horror stories have nothing to do with reality, and they come from the movie The China Syndrome. People believed a Hollywood fiction instead of facts. Everything the environmental movement has done has made the environment worse. Current Biden policies shift the damage around, but they don't actually have any environmental impact. Biden has limited oil drilling in the United States and canceled pipelines. But he's also dropped opposition to Russian pipelines, and he's called on OPEC Plus to drill more. The upshot is he wants to report that he's made progress on carbon emissions while not actually reducing them. Those policies have caused runaway inflation in the United States, stifled our economy, empowered Russia and the Middle Eastern countries, all while not having any real environmental impact. In fact, the only impacts his environmental policies have had is bad economic impacts and bad security impacts. Now, of course, there's also been a lot of focus on electric cars, so let's take a good look at that. Yeah, even though electric vehicles have zero emissions when they're on the road, it doesn't mean that they don't generate emissions and create pollution at any other point during their lifespan. Due to the complex nature of the electric vehicle batteries, it takes twice as much energy to produce an electric car than it does to create a petroleum or diesel car. And so the emissions are twice as much as well. So in the construction process, you're causing twice as much damage to the environment as when you produce traditional cars. Electric cars also rely on the use of lightweight metals. These materials, like aluminum, take energy to produce and process, which is where the use of power plants come in. Normally, these power plants are coal-fired, and ultimately, they're creating pollution and emissions. After you build electric cars, they rely on the electricity produced by the local network, which they'll either get from a coal or oil, powered power plant, or possibly natural gas. And of course, greenhouse gases will be produced from them, or from a grid using renewable energies generated from solar and wind. Now, solar panels have the same problem as the electric batteries, and we'll get into that because that problem comes from the mining. A study by MIT estimated that the global mining for two unique rare earth metals required for electric cars, neodymium and dysprosium, will need to increase by 700% for neodymium and 2,600% for dysprosium, just to keep up with demand for electric cars. Now, previously, the demand for rare earth metals was slow, making it easy for China, who produces 98% of the world's rare earth metals, to keep up. But now, the demand is quickly accelerating. To show the contrast of demand, a conventional car will use about 1 pound of rare earth metals. But an electric car will use 10 times the amount just to be able to produce a lightweight batteries and the cars themselves. Now, in countries where the rare earth metals are produced, there are often human rights violations, polluted rivers and soils, and an above-average chance that the people of those countries are breathing in toxic substances. The mining of these metals is dangerous and causes more pollution than a traditional gas-powered car creates emissions. At the end of their life, the batteries have to be disposed of. And the chemicals from the batteries tend to leach into landfills because as of right now, they're not recyclable and they pollute the ground and pollute the water. So the focus on electric cars causes more damage. As we've seen historically, the environmentalist solutions cause more damage in the long run than they solve. So far, no. we should not be following the environmentalists' lead when it comes to solving climate change. And their claims of damage aren't credible either. Let's take a look at some of the climate predictions that they've pushed over the years. Okay, the first of which was global cooling is the real problem. When the environmentalist movement began back in the 1970s, climate change was even then a core belief for them. But unlike now, they were more concerned about an ice age than a planet that was too hot. Environmentalist claims by now we'd be knee-deep in an ice age. And they said, if global warming isn't reversed by the year 2000, it will be too late to avert catastrophe. That was a 1999 prediction by Noel Brown and environmentalists at the UN. And in fact, those predictions kept getting worse and worse. That if global warming is not reversed by the year 2000, coastal flooding and crop failures would create an exodus of eco-refugees, threatening political chaos. Well, none of this dystopian vision has come to pass in the years since. They also predicted that most species on Earth would perish by 1995. Clearly, that hasn't happened. And additionally, the doomsday clock of climate change keeps ticking. At various predictions, had the problem as irreversible by 1990, 2000, and 2009. So what does all of this mean? It means that climate change is real, but the dire predictions likely aren't. We do need to solve the problem, but the solution won't come from environmentalists. In all likelihood, like most other problems, this will be solved by the private sector. That's the raw, naked truth. I'm Eric Lopkin, and you can find us every episode at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can find us on the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever finer podcasts are played. So don't miss our next episode as well as the rest of the Xvadio Podcast Network. We'll see you then.